Hello, fellow leaders. My name is Prasad Vadlamani, and I'm your host of the Indian Leadership Podcast. Today, I welcome you to a powerful and hard hitting episode with Vijay Vijayasankar. We couldn't decide which parts of our long, interesting conversation to edit out, so we are releasing it in two parts. In the first part of this episode, he spoke about his education in Thiruvananthapuram, the strong influence of his dad while growing up, getting his first job at TCS, and migrating to the USA. When he first landed in the USA, things were so different compared to India, he felt he might have landed on Mars. He openly shared how difficult it was to be on H-1B visa and the long winding path towards citizenship, which in his opinion needed a Zen-like attitude. He spoke about his path from technology leadership into sales and how his opinion about non-technical roles changed after a year into his sales career. Hello. Hi, Vijay. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest on Indian Leadership Podcast. Here we have Vijay Shankar. He is a senior executive working at IBM, and he currently leads the IBM relationship with Amex as their managing partner. Prior to that, he has done various roles from SAP consulting, analytics, managing large accounts and service lines. He also worked briefly at SAP Labs and MongoDB in senior executive positions. He has started his career at TCS and he came to US 21 years ago. His education was bachelor's and master's in engineering and also MBA in finance from University of Kerala. He is from his posts and different blog posts, I understand that he born and raised in Trivandrum and is very proud to be from that beautiful town in the southern coast. Welcome, Vijay.
Yeah, Prasad, thank you. Just a slightly small correction. I do have a bachelor's in engineering in mechanical engineering, not a master's.
Oh, okay. We'll get that corrected. So, before jumping into it, I just want to say that I have been a very big fan of your engagement that you do on LinkedIn. So you share both the life lessons, both from the professional and personal front. You talk about your role models. You talk about your different types of career shifts that you have done from engineering or one into sales. How it was, your thought process and things like that. You also talk about your role models both personally and professionally, and your passion for cooking. So I think thank you for that. I truly appreciate and admire that authenticity.
Absolutely. It's good to know that somebody other than my family actually cares.
Oh, trust me, there are a lot of people who do. Let's start with your childhood, growing up in India, your influence as a kid, and what led to your education that you have pursued.
Yeah, very unplanned and chaotic to say the least, right? It's looking back, I cannot say at any point in my life I had much of an idea on what will happen next. I can probably make up a story looking back, connecting dots, but certainly not proactively, right? So in any case, like with most kids, wanted to be a policeman. I wanted to be in the circus. So assorted things of that nature. I had relatives who were in the police, and my grandfather used to have an elephant. So those were all the reasons why I wanted to be in the circus and in the police force and so on. And then the major influence was my father. My father was a mechanical engineer. He passed away last year. So I really thought that mechanical engineering is perhaps the coolest thing anybody could do because he thoroughly enjoyed machines. He was a very natural engineer, and that's what I wanted to do as well. Mostly to just mimic what he was doing, right? I did not really know what mechanical engineering included. But anyway, went and did that, right? So 4 years of that. By the time I finished mechanical engineering, I already knew that this was not my true calling. That's a really good engineer, right? He has a natural instinct for it. I did not think I am cut out to be a mechanical engineer. But nevertheless, I went and did a short stint in Apollo Tires, in Premier Tires in Kalamasheri. A few months of that, and it convinced me that this is not the line of work that I will succeed. It needs more, better people than me. Anyway, that led to figuring out perhaps an MBA would be the right thing to do. I had a lot of interest in finance. So I went and did my MBA. 18 months or so into my MBA, I realized that no, actually, this is not my true calling either. I had good grades and stuff, right? So I was a pretty decent student, but quickly realized that's not what I want to do for a living. I wanted to become a programmer, and I've been programming from, I don't know, sixth grade or seventh grade or something, with a hand-me-down computer that my uncle left with me when he went to the US to do his master's. So I learned BASIC when I was in sixth grade, and learned C maybe a year later. So by the time I was in college, I was a half-decent programmer. I could write fairly good video games. Obviously, these are not sophisticated by today's standards, so it needs to fit into a cassette, right? In those days, that was the storage. So did all of that. And then from the MBA campus, TCS recruited me, sent me to the US. And then I worked in Ernst & Young, and eventually landed in IBM. That's the background.
That's great. So did you work in India for a while, or have you directly got placed in?
A couple of months, few months, in a project in Mysore, an SAP implementation. And then they send me here.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's cool. Were you part of that Y2K? Did you have to come and do any of the Y2K work?
So Y2K happened while I was in Mysore. And I remember sitting behind my friend on a Yamaha RX100 on New Year's Eve, like at 11:50. And we sped back from where we were living to the client's office, went to the server room, and I typed scripts directly onto the server to check if Y2K screwed up our system. And of course, it did not. There was no reason for it to screw over an SAP system because the date format is already 4 digits for the year. But nevertheless, we were very, very afraid that something would go wrong. So at 11:50, we went to the office, waited till the server showed 12:01. Ran the scripts, and found that it was cool. But yeah, I did not work on a Y2K project directly. So mainframe was the big deal when I came into the field, but I did not have to work on mainframes at all.
Okay. I mean, I don't think any political administration has that kind of impetus to have IT education in India as much as Y2K did, or even the immigration that happened outside of
it. Totally. Yeah.
So that was a doomsday planning which worked out really well.
Exactly. And also was a big reason for the massive engineering immigration to this country, right? That it cost a lot of people to get trained in COBOL. And got opportunities to come here, and then most of the people reskilled very quickly.
So next we'll move into the immigration, starting your life in a new country, and the reason why you chose to US, or other opportunities that you might have to and what helped you settle in USA. Can you talk about the initial days?
Immigration, I cannot say anything positive about the immigration experience, right? It was a brutally difficult experience. And when I see people who came after me, doesn't seem to be improving, right? If anything, it's only worsening. So it is absolutely a painful experience. Some credit to TCS. They did some training for us on how life will be outside India before we left. But even then, it was very difficult for me. I'd only been on a plane once in my life at that point. So this was all new. I'd never been outside India. Came and landed in JFK and had to take a cab to LaGuardia. The very first person I met outside JFK was an Indian guy who introduced himself. His name was Hari. And he told me that, because I'm an Indian, he will do me a favor and take me to LaGuardia for $200. obviously 21 years ago, right? So
Right.
thankfully, I felt something was wrong, and I walked up to a cop. And as I was moving towards the cop, 10 feet, I saw this Harry running extremely fast in the opposite direction. I was like, come on. You land in a new country, and the very first dude who tries to cheat you is a fellow Indian, right? I mean, that definitely hurt me a lot. Um, there were other difficulties as well, right? I mean, I came to Colorado Springs, and I needed to call my manager from the airport to find, which motel I needed to go to. I did not know how to use the public phone here. Um, did not know how to get change. I just had $200 bills with me. And it was very difficult. I took a rental car. I drove on the wrong side of the road for the first 10 minutes or so before I realized what I was doing. I jumped over the curb to the other side. I did not know how to cross the road, that there is a pedestrian button that you can hit. So I stood in front of the road for 20 minutes before somebody hit the button. And I'm like, oh, now I get it. Very tough to drive a car where I had to open the door to show my driver's license to the rental agreement package, because there were no cars with automatic windows in India.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I couldn't find how to lower the window shield. So I had to open the door, which scared the person, because nobody does that in this country. So
Sure.
Everything was, I could have as well landed in Mars, right? So
Yeah.
jet lagged in the middle of the night and going through this experience was not fun. Then all the normal immigrant experiences, like, setting the house on fire because, all the Indian cooking involved oil, smoke alarms going off. And when I look at, my young friends who came much after me and see many of them going through similar adventures, I don't feel as bad today as I felt back in the day. But assimilating into this society was not easy. Caucasian colleagues who did not understand the Indian culture. So well-meaning questions often would be very hurtful. So there were all those challenges back in the day. And I've faced my fair share of, we can call it racism for the want of a better word, but got through all of that. One of the most difficult things were all these H1 renewals while your green card is in process. So going and standing outside the Chennai consulate in rain for practically no reason, right? As in, you walk in there, they don't ask you a single question, they will still issue the visa. Never in any of those years anybody asked any question, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to go through this process. It takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money. It's quite painful and slow. The green card process was not fun. But you struggle through all of that because you want to do it the right way, right? So went through all of it. All I can say in hindsight is you need to have a little bit of a Zen attitude to this, that it will eventually work. It will not work in the time frame that you want. Vast majority of the commentary on immigration in this country is about illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. People don't often realize that the legal immigration route is totally broken. And we don't get, right, the political leadership doesn't spend as much time thinking about making that part right. So good people, who come from India and other places as legal immigrants and pay a lot of taxes and try to do all the right things, don't go into criminal activities, blah, blah, blah. They get a fairly raw deal. It should be a lot easier. I know, there are lots and lots of reasons why it is difficult to fix it, but it can and should be fixed.
It should be fixed.
Yes. Are a net goodness to the economy and to the country. And I just wish it was a little easier. But my only advice to people going through that friction now is to realize that don't fight it, because you will only get frustrated. Go with it, and it eventually works out. It took a long time for me, right? I was already here for probably 15, 17 years or something before I got my citizenship, maybe more. It's a process, right? And I have no fond memories of it. It's the kind of past that I don't want to think about very much for that reason. It's just absolutely.
It almost felt like some invisible weight off my shoulders when I first held that green card in my hand.
Yeah.
So similar emotions that you're saying, and because of this country cap, and for the number of green cards that people can get, but at the same time, the funnel upwards for H1B like is predominantly given to our countrymen, but the GCs are like very limited, so it creates
Sure,
a
and
big
all for
backlog.
good reasons too, right? I mean, the
Right.
government probably wants to be equitable to everyone. I have full respect for everything they try to
Yeah.
do. It's just a very inefficient process. I mean, it doesn't match the reality of what the immigrant situation in this country is, right?
Right.
The process is stuck in the past, and it doesn't cater to the needs of today.
Many people, when they're going through those the H1 multiple H1 renewals and green card processes, they always have this +1 syndrome, right? Like, I'm going to just stay here for 1 year and I'm going to go back. So did you go through that, and how do you did you
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I was no different. I had no intentions of ever being away from Trivandrum in my life, right? Um, we had some financial hardship that I wanted to get out of. For that, the money you make, the arbitrage of the currency was a big attraction, right, of coming to this country. But beyond which, I had no reason to ever, get a GC or, become a citizen, all of which I eventually did. Um, and every year I was like, yeah, probably need one, maybe 2 more years to hang, and then I'll go back. Then we had our daughter, and this is also the reason why it took a very long time for me to become a citizen. One is that the process was very slow, but the second part was I was very slow because I always wanted to go back, so I didn't even want a green card to begin with. It took, I think my daughter was born in 2005, and it was probably in 2006 that I figured, yeah, maybe it's now a good time to settle down here and think long term, right? Maybe we should live here. We bought a house, um, but all of that, right? I mean, in hindsight, right? I was on an H1 when we bought the house, right? Not making a ton of money or anything. If bad things happened on the immigration front, I would have been bankrupt. There's just no way to avoid that. But I also had the confidence that my skills are good enough to find another job if I get fired. I had anyway no intention of committing any crime, so that would be the other way to lose my immigration status. So the only way to lose my immigration status was to get fired, and I had this confidence in the back of my mind that if I get fired, I'm a good enough programmer that I can go find another job. Which kind of helped me throughout my career, that I've always kept my skills sharp, because that immigrant lack of confidence is always there in the back of your mind that something bad is going to happen and you need a plan B. My plan B was to keep my skills sharp so I can always put food on the table for my family, right? So kind of worked out fine.
Yeah, I mean, but there are a lot of young people who are still going through the same kind of decisions, right? They, in the last 2-3 years, the real estate market has become so hot, but I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands of H1B holders out there who couldn't ride that wave because they weren't very sure of, whether they'll be able to stay in the country by losing a job for more than a month.
Absolutely. And I invested with my eyes open on real estate. And before I got my green card, I already bought some more real estate, fully understanding the risk, but trusting that my skills are good enough to keep me employed somewhere. Thankfully, IBM never fired me, and they were very nice to me throughout. But this was then in the back of my mind all the time, that this cycle will pass by if I sit around doing nothing, and there is a significant risk that I have to take, but I consciously took that. But this was my backup, right? That I spent an extraordinary amount of time making sure that my skills always stay sharp. And I was well networked. People knew me, so I always knew in the back of my mind that even if, God forbid I get fired, there was always a chance that I can find another job quickly. And that part is important for the young immigrants who come here, right? I get it, because I've spent sleepless nights thinking through, is it a bright idea to put all my eggs in real estate, where I would be so totally screwed if bad things happen. But when I did the pros and cons, I found that as long as you have a plan B to stay legally immigrant here, it doesn't matter. You can take that risk. And I was young enough also, right? So time is the other factor.
Sure.
And my thing was, okay, on a conservative basis, it'll probably take till 2013 to get my green card, which kind of worked out exactly that way. If I wait that long, I will lose one or two business cycles. I was like, why? I'll take the risk now. And it paid off. Now, obviously, it's a personal choice, but I would highly encourage people not to do it as a gamble. Do it as a conscious decision where you actually know what your plan B is. How will you exit out if bad things happen?
Sure. So now, next we're going to talk about your career. What was the first job? Was it in India, in US? Transition, the experiences, and also like how the career progression has happened.
So I'll put a little bit of a framework to that question. Looking back at my career, right? When we start out, we are generally told that career progression is like climbing a corporate ladder. Ladder, I think, is a misleading analogy, because a ladder, every step in the ladder is equally spaced, right? That is not true about career. So you could join as a trainee and get your first couple of promotions in a few years. Once you become a manager, then for you to go to a senior manager, it is not the same time as it took for you to go from trainee to, say, your first level engineer. This is a important thing to realize upfront, because if you think about ladder, there is a very high chance that you will get frustrated that you are not progressing very fast. My preferred way of thinking about it is to think about it like surfing. So if you're a surfer and you go to a beach and you wade into the water with your surfboard, you may have practiced really hard, you are in great shape, you have great skills to ride a big wave, but there is nothing you can do to make a wave happen. Wave still is up to the nature, right? For it to come. All you can do is practice and wait for that wave, and then that wave will come. And if you are well practiced and you are there, you can ride that wave. It is quite possible that you might get 2 or 3 waves back to back, and you can ride all of them. Or maybe you ride 2 and you might crash in the third one. But the only thing you can really do if a wave is not coming is go try another beach. But you cannot make a wave happen, right? That needs to be very clear in our mind. That's roughly how careers work, right? So with that background, and this is also why I have never had any short-term plans in my career. There was maybe the closest to what I had was this irresponsible idea I developed in my MBA days, that I had a whole Excel sheet, actually not Excel, Lotus 123 sheet, that made me think that mathematically it is possible to retire at 30 or worst case at 35. Because that is the kind of education you get in MBA, right? Everything can be modeled. And I modeled with God and absolutely horrible assumptions. Anyway, 30th birthday happened. It was super depressing. I realized that there is no way to retire at 30. But by then I was old enough, smart enough to understand neither can I retire at 35. So I spared myself the second round of depression. But it also helped me stop making short-term goals. I have no short-term goals in life, right? So over a long period of time, I roughly had an idea of what I wanted to become. But if you had asked me, what do you want to be next year or in 2 years or 3 years, I was pretty easy. Didn't really matter very much to me. That attitude continues for me till this day. So if you look at my career, I started in TCS as a assistant systems engineer trainee. It's like the longest job role description ever. And then I think like 6 months later or 1 year later, something like that, they made me an assistant systems engineer without the training. Progressed and joined IBM in 2006 as a senior consultant or managing consultant, something like that. Made partner around 2011. So it was fairly fast from that point. So if you look at the early part of my career, right? So from MBA through my 30th birthday, I had really not progressed very much in my career, but I had a lot of experience. I jumped a few companies. I lived in England for a while, in Liverpool for a while. That's where my wife and I got married. So I had a lot of life experience, but not much of career progression in its true sense. Came to IBM in 2006, and then like every year and a half or something like that, I got promoted and rose up fairly fast. Then I left consulting, went to SAP Labs, and was in the engineering team for a little while. Then I went to MongoDB and ran channels and services for some time. Got recruited back to IBM. And now I just finished 6 years in my second tenure in IBM and have had probably 7 or 8 different roles in that time. For the last 3 years, I've been leading our relationship with Amex, which is our oldest client. Amex has been an IBM client for 109 years. Wow. So, it's not something that we see every day, right? So very, very, very happy with that. And that's essentially my story. Primarily an engineer in everything that I do. So if you wake me up in the middle of the night and ask, what are you? I will say I'm a developer, right? That's my core identity. All these other things like executive roles and sales and so on, they just so happened. In the heart of heart, I'm a technologist. I'm a builder, right? That's my core identity, and I try really hard to keep it that way as well. That's what I enjoy the most. Yeah, I've never felt as much happiness in any part of my professional life as I see when I get my code to compile. I have a smile on my face, and there is a certain level of happiness that I don't get when I sign a large contract or I make an amazing project plan, right? Or give advice for an M&A deal for my company or anything. I enjoy all of those things, but if you compare it with coding, I enjoy coding way more than I enjoy any of those things.
The skill and the passion for that, keeps you grounded and say like this is a path forward, but at the same time, these are other things that will help us.
Yeah, to keep an open mind, right? I had this impression early in my career that salespeople are generally crooks. They lie a lot, and that's how they make their living and so on. And then one day my manager asked me, hey, well, why don't you take on a sales quota and see if you can do it? But he made it risk-free for me. He said, try it for 1 year. If you don't like it, you can go back to being a technologist. And I thought, why not? And I realized in that 1 year that I'm very good at sales, and you don't need to lie and you don't need to bullshit, because you can explain technology to a client without jargon and without lying in pretty straightforward terms, using a whiteboard and a marker instead of a fancy PowerPoint. And you come across much more relatable to the client, and they buy. So after 1 year of doing that, my complete perspective on these other roles, that I had a very negative impression up front, changed. And this is also part of the reason that I share my thoughts on LinkedIn fairly frequently, because I do know that I'm not alone with these feelings, right?
Yeah.
So every young engineer has some insecurities about what to do next and whether they can try their hand at other things and so on. And I figured that at least some of them I can help by sharing my experiences. I don't ever take a position that my line of thinking is the only valid way to look at the world, but at least it's one way to look at the world, and if it helps somebody, that's plenty, right? I mean, I don't look at LinkedIn to build a brand or anything of that nature. I'm not a marketeer. IBM has amazing marketeers. They don't need me to push, and I generally don't talk about IBM in my LinkedIn posts or tweets or anything, right? So
Right.
I do it in the spirit of sharing information and sharing ideas, and then soliciting feedback, right? Most of the time I will learn something from the engagement, right? So that's
Definitely. I mean, those stories come across very authentic, right? Because you are sharing, this was my perspective and this is my path into it. And after the path, this is my change of perspective, right? So that's very powerful. Okay, leaders, here is where we wrap up. And in the next part, we learn about Vijay's poignant thoughts about mentoring, sponsoring, and helping others along the way. Have a great time.